Undercover boss saw a woman baking croissants at 5 a.m., then discovered a shocking truth. It's my brother's sourdough recipe, the one that ruined him, Lena whispered, her voice trembling in the 5 a.m. stillness of the bakery, her eyes locking with Ethan's, and sometimes, I swear, it tastes just like the harvest gold we bake here. What dark secret lay hidden within Golden Harvest's most famous bread? And how did this shocking pre-dawn confession unravel a long-buried injustice? To discover the full, astonishing story, make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, and tune in for the whole investigation. The pre-dawn chill of Seattle hadn't yet surrendered to the September morning, but inside the flagship Golden Harvest Bakery near Pike Place Market, it was already a maelstrom of controlled, fragrant heat. Flour dust hung in the air, catching the dim utility lights like 1,000 tiny stars. The rhythmic thud of dough meeting steel, the whir of industrial mixers, and the insistent beep of oven timers created a symphony only bakers knew. He'd slipped in through the bakery's back delivery entrance at precisely 4:45 a.m., the collar of his worn flannel jacket pulled high, a gray knit cap shadowing his features. He called himself Tom Harris here, the newest intern, clumsy and eager to learn. He'd been directed to the main baking floor, and as he rounded the corner, pushing past a stack of empty flour sacks, he stopped dead. The scene before him was not what he'd expected. He'd anticipated a small team, a bustle of early morning activity. Instead, under the stark fluorescent glow, a lone figure moved with an almost preternatural speed and precision. A woman, her dark hair pulled back tightly, danced between a massive steel workbench and a bank of hulking ovens. Dough, pale and pliant, was being coaxed, stretched, and folded with an expertise that spoke of countless hours, countless dawns spent in just this way. She was laminating croissant dough. He realized her movements economical, each press of the sheeter, each turn of the dough, a masterclass in efficiency. Flour dusted her apron and the strong line of her forearms. Her focus was absolute, her brow furrowed in concentration as she wielded a rolling pin almost as long as she was tall, then a wheel cutter, slicing perfect triangles from the vast expanse of layered butter and dough. There was no one else. No prep cooks, no assistant bakers, just her. The sheer volume of product arrayed on cooling racks, already golden brown sourdough bowls, trays of glistening danishes, and now, the nascent croissants was staggering for one person to achieve. The air thrummed with her silent, intense energy. He watched, hidden for a moment by a towering rack of sheet pans, as she loaded a tray of pain au chocolate into a cavernous oven, her movements fluid, practiced, yet carrying an undercurrent of something weary. She glanced at the large wall clock. 5:03 a.m. A small, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her lips before she turned back to the mountain of dough, her expression resetting to one of fierce determination. Who was this woman? And why in God's name was she doing all of this? The work of at least 3 bakers, entirely on her own. The aroma of butter beginning to caramelize filled the air, a beautiful scent underscored by an unnerving reality. He felt a knot tighten in his chest, a mixture of awe and a deeply unsettling sense of wrongness. Ethan Cole, at 42, was a man who genuinely loved the smell of yeast and caramelized sugar. As CEO of Golden Harvest Bakery, a chain now boasting 30 artisanal bakeries across the Pacific Northwest and in Northern California, he often joked that flour ran in his veins. It wasn't far from the truth. Golden Harvest had begun as his grandparents' single neighborhood shop in Portland, Oregon, a place renowned for its hearty rye breads and impeccable fruit pies. Ethan had spent his childhood there, perched on a flour sack, absorbing the craft, the dedication, and the simple joy of creating something beautiful and nourishing from basic ingredients. After business school and a stint working for a larger food conglomerate, an experience that taught him much about scale but left him yearning for authenticity, Ethan had taken the helm of the family business. He had ambitious plans. He envisioned a golden harvest that retained its artisanal soul but reached a wider audience. And he'd largely succeeded. The brand was synonymous with quality. Handcrafted breads, locally sourced ingredients where possible, and a commitment to traditional baking techniques. His days were now typically a whirlwind of strategic meetings in their sleek Seattle headquarters, calls with regional managers, marketing plan reviews, and financial forecasting. He lived comfortably in a modern condo overlooking Puget Sound, his life a carefully curated balance of corporate responsibility and a lingering passion for the craft he still stress-baked in his own high-end kitchen on weekends, kneading dough as a form of meditation. His wife, Olivia, an architect, often teased him about being more married to the bakery than to her, a jest that held a kernel of truth he tried to ignore. They had no children, their demanding careers largely filling their lives. Ethan's desire was simple: to see Golden Harvest not just succeed, but to be a company his grandparents would still be proud of, a company that valued its people as much as its product. Lately, however, that pride had been tinged with concern. The Seattle flagship store, their jewel near the bustling Pike Place market, had been showing troubling signs. Profits were down, despite its prime location. Staff turnover was inexplicably high. And more disturbingly, online reviews, once glowing, now frequently mentioned inconsistent product quality, a cardinal sin for an artisanal brand, along with slow service and unmotivated staff. These weren't just isolated grumbles. They pointed to a systemic issue. Ethan had discussed it with his COO, Sarah Chun, a sharp, data-driven executive who had been with him since the early expansion days. Sarah had suggested sending in a corporate audit team. But Ethan, remembering his grandfather's adage that you can't understand the bread without getting your hands in the dough, felt a more direct approach was needed. He needed to see the reality on the ground, unfiltered by management reports. The idea of going undercover as Tom Harris, a career changer looking to learn the baking trade, took root. He concocted a plausible backstory, got a new haircut, grew a few days scruff, and swapped his bespoke suits for worn jeans, flannel shirts, and a pair of non-prescription glasses that subtly altered his familiar face. He informed only Sarah Chun of his plan, arranging for his application to be fast-tracked at the Seattle store. He wanted to understand the employee experience, the production challenges, and why their star location was faltering. He certainly hadn't expected to walk in at 4:45 a.m. and find a solitary woman single-handedly powering the entire morning bake, a silent testament to a system that felt, from his first shocking glimpse, deeply broken. Ethan, as Tom Harris, officially started his internship under the guidance of Lena Martinez, the whirlwind of solitary activity he'd witnessed on that first pre-dawn visit. At 35, Lena possessed an almost intimidating competence. Her dark hair was always tightly bound, wisps escaping to frame a face that was often smudged with flour but dominated by intense, focused eyes. Her hands, strong and capable, bore the faint, silvery scars of 1,000 minor burns, a baker's mark of honor. For the first few days, Ethan played the part of the eager, slightly inept newcomer. He fumbled with shaping bowls, struggled to keep pace with Lena's relentless rhythm, and asked what he hoped were believably naive questions. Lena, despite her obvious workload, was patient, her instructions concise and clear. She moved with an ingrained efficiency, never a wasted motion, her knowledge of doughs, fermentation times, and oven quirks encyclopedic. You laminate croissants like you were born doing it, Ethan remarked one morning, genuinely impressed as he tried to replicate her deft folding technique, only to produce a lopsided, butter-streaked mess. Lena offered a rare, fleeting smile without looking up from her task. Practice. Lots of practice. He learned quickly that Lena was the backbone of the morning shift. While other staff would trickle in closer to opening time, a couple of counter staff, another baker who seemed to handle simpler tasks like muffins and cookies, Lena was the one responsible for the high-skill items, the sourdoughs, the artisan loaves, and particularly the croissants, which were a significant draw for the bakery. She arrived before anyone else and was often one of the last of the baking staff to leave. Ethan admired her dedication and skill immensely. The quality of the products she personally crafted was exceptional, consistently meeting the Golden Harvest standard he championed. However, a growing unease began to settle in him. He saw the deep shadows under her eyes, the way she sometimes leaned heavily against a workbench for a moment when she thought no one was looking, the almost mechanical way she consumed a quick cup of coffee and a piece of day-old bread for her own sustenance, rarely taking a proper break. The inciting incident wasn't a single dramatic event, but rather a quiet, almost throwaway moment that crystallized his concerns. It was late one afternoon, near the end of a grueling 10-hour shift for Lena. Ethan, as an intern, was thankfully on a shorter schedule. They were cleaning down the stainless steel surfaces, the usual bakery clamor having subsided. "You must really love baking to put in these kinds of hours every day," Ethan said, trying to sound casual. Lena paused her scrubbing, her gaze distant for a moment. "It's not just love, Tom," she said, her voice low. "It's necessary. About obligations." She offered no further explanation, her expression closing off as she quickly resumed her work, a subtle signal that the brief opening was over. Obligations? The word snagged in Ethan's mind. It wasn't the answer of a passionate artisan entirely consumed by her craft. It hinted at something more, a pressure beyond the desire to bake perfect bread. He'd seen her dedication, but now he saw it tinged with a weary resolve, a sense of duty that seemed to go beyond her employment contract. Why was this incredibly talented baker, the linchpin of their flagship store's most critical production, working herself to the bone with an air of quiet desperation? What obligations could drive such relentless effort, especially when, as he was beginning to suspect, she wasn't being adequately supported or compensated by the very company that relied so heavily on her? His initial goal had been to observe operations, identify inefficiencies, and understand the morale issues. Now, a new, more focused objective began to form. He needed to understand Lena Martinez's story. Her situation felt like a critical symptom of the malaise affecting the Seattle store, perhaps even the company in a way he hadn't anticipated. His admiration for her skill was now coupled with a profound sense of concern and a dawning suspicion that something was fundamentally unjust in her circumstances. He decided then that he would find out what those obligations were and why she seemed to be carrying such a heavy burden alone. In the days that followed, Ethan, still Tom, became a more astute observer of Lena Martinez. He paid closer attention to her routines, her interactions, and the subtle cues that painted a picture of a life lived under immense pressure. He saw her meticulously pack up any slightly imperfect but still edible pastries at the end of her shift, not for herself. He noted, as she always ate frugally, but presumably for someone else. He noticed she never joined the other staff for a coffee run or an after-work drink, always citing the need to get home or prepare for the next early start. He began to carefully, casually ask questions of the other employees. "Clara, A young woman who worked the front counter and had a penchant for friendly gossip proved to be a source of information, albeit tinged with speculation. Lena? Oh, she's amazing. A machine, Clara said one afternoon while polishing the glass display case. But she's a total mystery. Works constantly. Someone said she sends almost all her money somewhere, like paying off a huge debt or something. Lives in this tiny place over in Ballard, barely makes ends meet from what I hear. Never buys new clothes, always brings her own food. It's kind of sad, you know, for someone so talented. Ethan also noticed the stark contrast between the exquisite quality of Lena's signature items. The croissants were flaky marvels. The sourdough had a perfect tang and crumb, and some of the other products that were clearly made by less skilled hands during later shifts. This inconsistency was likely a major contributor to the online complaints. Lena was the quality control, the standard bearer, but she couldn't be everywhere, do everything. The staffing issue was glaring. The store manager, a harried man named David Chun, no relation to Sarah Chun, Ethan seemed perpetually stressed and ineffective. He rarely ventured into the bakery proper, mostly staying in a small office or dealing with front-of-house issues. When Ethan, as Tom, innocently asked Lena if they were short-staffed, she just gave a wry, tired smile and said, "We manage." It was clear we mostly meant she. Driven by a growing sense of urgency, Ethan took a risk. He contacted Sarah Chun, his COO, late one evening from his hotel room, breaking his own rule about minimal outside contact. "Sarah, I need you to discreetly pull the personnel file for a baker named Lena Martinez at the Seattle flagship. I need her salary details, start date, performance reviews, everything. And I need it to look like a random HR audit." Sarah, ever efficient, had the information for him by the next morning. What he saw made his jaw tighten. Lena Martinez had been with Golden Harvest for 6 years. Her performance reviews were consistently stellar, filled with phrases like exceptional skill, unwavering dedication, and critical asset. Yet, her salary was only marginally above that of a junior baker, significantly below the industry average for a head baker or artisan specialist with her experience and responsibilities, especially in a high-cost city like Seattle. There were no records of significant raises or promotions, despite her pivotal role in producing their most acclaimed items. This was the first major complication. The woman who was, in many ways, the heart of his flagship bakery's quality was being grossly undervalued and underpaid. Was this negligence on the part of local management, or something more systemic? The store manager, David, seemed more overwhelmed than malicious, but he was clearly failing to advocate for his most valuable employee. Ethan also made discreet inquiries about the Harvest Gold sourdough, the company's top-selling bread, a product whose recipe was a closely guarded secret developed years ago. Lena made it beautifully, of course. He noted that its unique flavor profile was indeed remarkable. He started to feel a prickle of unease, a sense that the threads of Lena's personal struggles and the bakery's operational issues might be more deeply intertwined than he initially imagined. He needed to understand the obligations Lena had mentioned and the quiet desperation that clung to her like the scent of yeast. His investigation was no longer just about business metrics. It was becoming deeply personal. The opportunity Ethan had been waiting for arrived unexpectedly during a rare lull. A massive catering order for a downtown corporate event had just been picked up, leaving the bakery unusually quiet on a Wednesday afternoon. Most of the other staff had clocked out or were busy with front-of-house duties. Only Ethan and Lena remained in the back, cleaning down the expansive steel tables and packing away unused ingredients. The atmosphere was less frantic than usual, almost peaceful. Ethan, as Tom, decided to gently probe again, building on the brief opening Lena had offered days before. "You mentioned obligations the other day, Lena," he began, carefully keeping his tone light and non-judgmental as he wiped down a proofing cabinet. "If you don't mind me asking, it sounds like a heavy weight to carry." Lena continued scrubbing a large mixing bowl, her back to him for a long moment. The only sounds were the clatter of cleaning supplies and the distant hum of the refrigerators. Ethan thought perhaps he'd overstepped, that she would shut down again. Then she sighed, a deep, weary exhalation that seemed to carry years of burden. She turned, leaning back against the cool steel of the workbench, her usual professional mask softened by exhaustion. "It is," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It's for my brother, Miguel." Ethan kept his expression neutral, encouraging. "Your brother?" Lena nodded, her gaze fixed on some distant point. "He passed away 7 years ago. Quel accident." She paused, swallowing hard. "He had a dream, Tom. A little bakery of his own, down in Tacoma. He poured everything into it. His heart, his soul, all his savings." Her voice caught. "He was an amazing baker, truly gifted. Especially his sourdough. He had this incredible recipe, something he'd worked on for years. It was magic." She looked down at her hands, tracing the lines of a faint scar on her knuckle. "He took on a partner, someone who promised to help with the business side, get him funding. But the guy, he wasn't what he seemed. He bled Miguel dry, took his ideas, and then vanished, leaving Miguel with a mountain of debt when the bakery inevitably failed." Ethan felt a cold dread begin to creep up his spine. He remained silent, letting her speak. Miguel was devastated. Losing the bakery broke his heart. A few months later, the accident. Lena's eyes welled up, but she blinked back the tears fiercely. "The debt was around $50,000. I promised him, I promised our parents, I'd pay it off. Every cent. So his name wouldn't be shamed." She took a shaky breath. "So that's what I do. I bake. I work. I send almost everything I earn to pay down that loan. It's slow, but I'm getting there." She looked directly at Ethan, then, a flicker of something pride, pain, defiance in her eyes. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, her voice hesitant, "It's funny sometimes when I'm making the Harvest Gold sourdough here, our big signature loaf. I taste it, and I think it reminds me so much of Miguel's. The tang, the crust. But that's crazy, right? Just a coincidence. There are only so many ways to make sourdough." She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh that didn't quite ring true. Ethan's blood ran cold. Harvest Gold sourdough, their flagship product. The bread that had helped propel Golden Harvest from a local favorite to a regional powerhouse. The recipe developed by Richard Baxter, a former head of product development who had left the company abruptly about 8 years ago, lauded as a genius, showered with bonuses for his creation. A coincidence? Or something far, far more sinister? The shocking truth from the title of his mental Undercover documentary suddenly blared in his mind. This was it. This was the potential earthquake beneath his entire company. Lena's quiet, almost throwaway comment, her weary admission, it had just transformed his investigation from a mission to fix operational flaws and address employee welfare into a desperate search for a truth that could unravel the very fabric of Golden Harvest success. He looked at Lena, truly looked at her, and saw not just an overworked, underpaid baker, but a woman of incredible integrity, unknowingly crafting the legacy of her lost brother for a company that might have stolen it from him. This was the point of no return. He had to know. He had to find out if Golden Harvest Golden Goose was, in fact, a stolen treasure. The implications of Lena's words hit Ethan with the force of a physical blow. He managed to maintain his composure as Tom, for the remainder of the shift, offering a few sympathetic but non-committal words to Lena, his mind reeling. The Harvest Gold sourdough, his company's crown jewel, the product that had funded much of their expansion, the recipe attributed to the brilliant, if somewhat mercurial, Richard Baxter. Could it really be Miguel Martinez's stolen legacy? That night, back in the sterile anonymity of his hotel room, Ethan felt a cold fury mixed with a profound sense of betrayal. If this was true, then the success Golden Harvest was built upon was tainted, rotten at its core. His grandparents' legacy, the artisanal principles he so fiercely protected, all of it would be a sham. He replayed Lena's hesitant words about the recipe, her dismissal of the similarity as mere coincidence. But her eyes had held a flicker of something else, a buried suspicion, perhaps a pain too deep to acknowledge. His first call, before the sun even hinted at rising over Seattle, was to Marcus Thorne, Golden Harvest's chief legal counsel and one of Ethan's oldest, most trusted confidants. Speaking in low, urgent tones, Ethan laid out everything. Lena's story, her brother Miguel, the failed Tacoma bakery, and the unnerving similarity to the Harvest Gold recipe. "Marcus, I need you to dig, and dig deep," Ethan instructed. Richard Baxter, his tenure here, specifically around the development of the Harvest Gold. I want to know everything about his dealings. And I need you to find out everything you can about Miguel Martinez and his bakery in Tacoma. Discreetly, utterly discreetly. No one else can know about this yet. Marcus, a seasoned lawyer known for his unflappability, was silent for a long moment. "Ethan," he finally said, his voice grave, "if there's even a shred of truth to this, the ramifications are monumental. Product origin, intellectual property, potential fraud, this could be catastrophic." "I know, Marcus. Just find me the truth." While Marcus's team began their covert investigation, Ethan continued his role as Tom at the bakery. But his perspective had shifted dramatically. He saw Lena now not just as an exemplary employee, but as a potential victim of a grievous injustice, unknowingly baking her heart out using what might be her own family's stolen creation. He observed her interactions with the Harvest Gold dough with a new, painful intensity. Every perfectly scored loaf, every fragrant batch pulled from the oven, felt like a fresh stab of guilt. He also started subtly probing the company's institutional memory. During a carefully managed call with Sarah Chun, his COO, under the guise of discussing general Seattle operational issues, he casually asked about Richard Baxter. "Baxter? Oh, he was before my time as COO, but I remember the legends," Sarah said. "Brilliant, apparently. Developed Harvest Gold and then cashed out. Made a fortune in bonuses and stock options. Last I heard, he retired to somewhere in the Caribbean." The pieces were falling into place, forming an increasingly ugly picture. Baxter, the lauded genius, conveniently disappearing after launching the company's most successful product. Miguel Martinez, the gifted baker, ruined and deceased. Lena, his sister, toiling endlessly to pay off debts stemming from that ruin, all while meticulously recreating the very recipe that might have destroyed her brother. Ethan found himself wrestling with an internal conflict far greater than any business challenge he'd ever faced. If the investigation confirmed his worst fears, what would he do? Exposing the truth could mean financial ruin for Golden Harvest, lawsuits, a public relations nightmare. The livelihoods of hundreds of employees, the value of the company his family had built over generations, all of it would be at risk. Yet, the thought of continuing to profit from such a profound deception, of allowing Lena's unwitting suffering to continue, was abhorrent. He realized that his undercover mission had become far more than an operational review. It was a moral crucible. His commitment solidified. Whatever the cost, he would uncover the full truth. And if that truth was as dark as he suspected, he would not flinch from making it right. Golden Harvest would either stand for integrity or it wouldn't stand at all in his eyes. He owed that much to Lena, to Miguel's memory, and to his own conscience. The weight of this knowledge was immense, but it also brought a strange clarity. The path ahead was treacherous, but the direction was no longer in doubt. Weeks turned into a month. Marcus Thorne's legal team worked with the quiet intensity of a bomb disposal squad, sifting through archived company records, digital correspondence, and old financial statements related to Richard Baxter's tenure. Ethan, meanwhile, continued his undercover role as Tom Harris, the strain of his dual existence mounting. Every interaction with Lena was now fraught with the unspoken weight of what he was uncovering. He saw her exhaustion deepen, yet her dedication never wavered. The breakthrough came via a secured email from Marcus. They had found a series of damning communications, initial enthusiastic emails between Richard Baxter and a Miguel Martinez, owner of the Flour Bin Bakery in Tacoma, discussing a potential partnership and investment. These were followed by requests from Baxter for detailed recipe formulations, particularly for Miguel's signature sourdough, under the guise of due diligence. Then, abruptly, the communication from Baxter ceased. Shortly thereafter, internal Golden Harvest memos showed Baxter presenting the newly developed Harvest Gold sourdough recipe to the executive team, claiming it as his own proprietary creation. The legal team also tracked down a disgruntled former assistant of Baxter's, a woman named Carol Jenkins, who had left Golden Harvest shortly after Baxter. Initially hesitant, Carol eventually agreed to speak, providing a sworn affidavit. She described Baxter as arrogant and ruthless, openly bragging in private about finding a gold mine with a naive small-town baker. She recalled Baxter meticulously documenting Miguel's recipes during a supposed collaboration visit to the flour bin, then systematically cutting Miguel off and launching the identical product under the Golden Harvest banner. Carol had been silenced with a hefty severance package and a non-disclosure agreement, but her conscience had troubled her for years. The evidence was irrefutable and sickening. Richard Baxter had systematically stolen Miguel Martinez's intellectual property, driven him to ruin, and built his own lucrative exit from Golden Harvest on that theft. The company, unwittingly or perhaps through willful ignorance at certain past executive levels, had profited massively from this deception. Ethan felt a cold rage, but also a heavy responsibility. He now faced his own dark night of the soul. The path of least resistance would be to quietly settle with Lena, bury the truth, and protect the company's reputation and financial stability. Baxter was likely untouchable in his Caribbean tax haven. But every time he looked at Lena, diligently shaping the very bread that represented her family's stolen legacy, he knew he couldn't. The cost of silence was too high a moral price to pay. He made his decision. There would be full transparency, whatever the fallout. His first step was to call an emergency, confidential meeting with his current executive board and Sarah Chun. He laid out the entire story, presenting the evidence Marcus's team had compiled. The room was plunged into stunned silence, broken only by occasional gasps of disbelief and outrage. There were immediate concerns about legal exposure, shareholder reaction, and brand damage. Some argued for a more contained approach. But Ethan stood firm. Golden Harvest was built on a foundation of integrity, or so I believed, he stated, his voice unwavering. Our flagship product is the result of theft and has caused immeasurable suffering to an innocent family. We will not continue to profit from this. We will make this right, publicly and completely. This will be a painful process, but it is the only ethical path forward. He outlined his plan. full restitution to Lena, public acknowledgement of Miguel Martinez's creation, legal action against Baxter, however difficult, and a complete overhaul of their product development ethics and supplier relations. To his relief, after the initial shock, the majority of his board, particularly Sarah Chun, voiced their support for his principled stand. The final, most difficult step was preparing to reveal himself to Lena. He arranged to meet her at the Seattle bakery before her early morning shift, under the guise of Tom, having something important to discuss. He knew this conversation would change her life, and his forever. The weight of the impending revelation was immense. He had the auditor's valuation of what Miguel's recipe had earned the company, and a restitution figure that was staggering. He had the plans for renaming the bread, for creating a foundation in Miguel's name. But first, he had to tell her the truth as her colleague before revealing himself as the CEO who presided over the company that had, however unknowingly for most of its tenure, wronged her so deeply. The bakery was quiet and cool in the pre-dawn darkness, smelling faintly of yeast and yesterday's promise. Lena arrived at 4:30 a.m., her usual punctuality, a thermos of coffee in her hand. She looked surprised to see Tom already there, not in his usual intern scruff, but dressed in neat, dark trousers and a button-down shirt. He looked different, more serious. "Tom, you're early," she said, a questioning note in her voice. "Everything okay?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Lena, there's something I need to tell you. Something incredibly important. And I haven't been entirely honest with you about who I am." He watched her expression shift from curiosity to caution. He led her to the small, cluttered break room, the fluorescent light casting harsh shadows. "My real name is Ethan Cole," he said gently. "I'm the CEO of Golden Harvest Bakery." Lena stared at him, her eyes widening in disbelief, then narrowing in confusion. She took a step back, clutching her thermos. "CEO? But why? Why have you been working here like this?" A dozen emotions flickered across her face. Shock, suspicion, a dawning fear that she'd done something terribly wrong. "I came undercover because I knew something was wrong at this store, but I didn't know what," Ethan explained, his voice filled with a sincerity he hoped she could hear. "And Lena, what I discovered, it's much bigger than just operational issues. It's about you. And it's about your brother, Miguel." He saw the flicker of pain at the mention of Miguel's name. He gently recounted what his investigation had uncovered: Richard Baxter's deceit, the stolen recipe, the deliberate destruction of Miguel's dream. He laid out the evidence, speaking not as a CEO to an employee, but as one human being to another who had been grievously wronged. Tears welled in Lena's eyes as the full weight of the betrayal, the truth behind her years of struggle, and the uncanny resemblance of the Harvest Gold sourdough to her brother's masterpiece, finally crashed down upon her. The coincidence she tried to dismiss was a devastating reality. She sank onto one of the worn plastic chairs, her shoulders shaking. "So all this time," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, "all these years I've been baking his bread for them?" "Yes," Ethan said softly, his own heart aching for her. "And Golden Harvest, my company, has profited from it, unknowingly for most of that time, but profited nonetheless. And you, Lena, have carried the burden of debts that were a direct result of that theft." He then outlined what the company intended to do. He presented her with a formal, written apology from Golden Harvest. He showed her the documents for a trust fund being established in her name, containing a sum that represented full restitution for the use of Miguel's recipe over the years, an amount that would clear all her debts and provide her with significant financial security, $2 million. He told her of a plan to rename the Harvest Gold sourdough to Miguel's Legacy sourdough, with her brother's story and picture to be featured on the packaging. He also offered her a newly created role, head of artisan product development and quality for the entire Golden Harvest chain, with a salary and benefits package commensurate with that position, should she choose to accept it. Finally, he spoke of establishing the Miguel Martinez Foundation, funded by a percentage of the renamed sourdough's profits, to support aspiring artisan bakers from disadvantaged backgrounds. Lena listened in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face, tears of grief, of shock, but also, gradually, of a profound, dawning vindication. The man before her, the CEO who had worked beside her as a humble intern, was offering not just money, but justice. He was offering to restore her brother's name and legacy. The weeks and months that followed were a period of profound transformation for both Lena Martinez and Golden Harvest Bakery. True to Ethan's word, the company issued a public statement acknowledging the intellectual property theft by former executive Richard Baxter and detailing the steps being taken to make amends. The news sent ripples through the food industry and the local Seattle community. There was initial shock and some negative press, but the company's transparent handling of the scandal, its clear remorse, and its robust actions to rectify the injustice slowly began to win public respect. Legal proceedings were initiated against Richard Baxter. Though he remained abroad, his reputation in ruins. Lena, after taking some much-needed time to process everything, accepted the new role offered to her. Freed from the crushing weight of debt, she bought a small, comfortable house near the water, a place with a garden where she could finally relax. She blossomed in her new position, her unparalleled skill and quiet integrity becoming a guiding force for quality and innovation across all Golden Harvest bakeries. She spearheaded the official launch of Miguel's Legacy Sourdough, ensuring every detail, from the recipe's faithful execution to the story on the packaging, honored her brother. The bread became more popular than ever, a symbol of the company's commitment to doing right. The Miguel Martinez Foundation awarded its first scholarships, helping young, passionate bakers attend culinary school. Lena herself began mentoring some of the recipients, finding a new joy in sharing her craft. The Seattle flagship store, under new local management handpicked by Ethan and Lena, saw a resurgence. Morale soared, staff turnover plummeted, and product quality became consistently excellent across the board. Ethan Cole found that his Undercover experience had changed him irrevocably. He implemented new company-wide policies on ethical sourcing, intellectual property respect, and, crucially, employee welfare and compensation, ensuring that no other employee would ever be as overlooked or undervalued as Lena had been. Golden Harvest brand, once threatened, emerged stronger, its story of confronting a difficult truth and striving for redemption resonating with customers. Months later, Ethan visited the Seattle bakery. He found Lena in the sunlit kitchen, not frantically working alone, but overseeing a team of bakers, a smile on her face as she demonstrated a laminating technique. The aroma of baking bread, Miguel's bread, filled the air. "He will be so proud of you, Lena," Ethan said quietly. Lena looked at him, her eyes bright. "He will be proud of both of us, Ethan, for making things right." She paused, then added, "I only ever wanted to bake good bread. But you, and this company, gave my brother back his voice, his legacy." Ethan nodded, a sense of profound gratitude washing over him. From the sight of a solitary woman baking croissants at 5 a.m., a shocking truth had been uncovered, leading not to ruin, but to a deeper, more authentic integrity for Golden Harvest, proving that even in the world of big business, conscience and compassion could still be the most vital ingredients.